Welcome back. I want to visit with you today about our friends who used to work for NASA. And this is really a twofer because I want to integrate two stories here. First story is that former NASA scientists, astronauts, and other workers admonish the agency on climate change position. As you know from listening to our network, I have made a case, a very solid science-based case against anthropogenic global warming. To say that CO2 causes global mean temperature to go up or go down is scientifically unproven, and given the current data, it's false, outright false. And we've talked about what causation is. We've gone through that all before, but I wanted to mention that NASA has 49 former scientists and astronauts, and even a couple of the former heads of NASA. They've sent a letter to the NASA administrator, Charles Bolden, admonishing the agency for its role in advocating with a high degree of certainty man-made CO2 as the sole cause or the major cause of climate change, while neglecting empirical evidence that calls the theory into question. The group, which includes 7 Apollo astronauts and 2 former directors of NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, are dismayed over the failure of NASA, and specifically the Goddard Institute for Space Studies. That's, James Hansen, the only guy in the world nuttier than Al Gore. That's his little jewel. And they're upset that NASA and the Goddard Institute for Space Studies have failed to make an objective assessment of all the available scientific data on climate change. And they charge that NASA is relying too heavily on complex climate models that have proven scientifically inadequate in predicting climate only 1 or 2 decades in advance. In other words, the same econometric models that caused the housing bubble to burst, okay, that's what they're using for, basically 600 variable independent, you've got a very complex regression model with a single independent variable, global mean temperature, and 600 or 700 dependent variables. And that is just not a powerful or precise way to describe any naturally occurring system. So Mr. Stewart, who is chairman of the nonprofit organization Plants Need CO2, noted that many of the former NASA scientists harbored doubts about the significance of the CO2 to climate theory and have concerns over NASA's outright advocacy on this issue. While making presentations in late 2011 to many of the signatories of this letter, Stewart realized that NASA scientists should make their concerns known to both NASA and the Goddard Institute for Space Science. The American heroes, the astronauts that took to space, and the scientists and engineers that put them there are simply stating their concern over NASA's extreme advocacy for an unproven theory, says Mr. Stewart. There's a concern that if it turns out that CO2 is not the sole cause, not a major cause of climate change, NASA will have put the reputation of NASA's current and former employees, and even the very reputation of science itself at risk of public ridicule and distrust. Now, what's going on here is extremely interesting. Number one, you've got people, 7 astronauts leading the parade here, who are serious individuals trained in the scientific method. Every one of those astronauts has a PhD. Every one of the engineers and scientists has a PhD. They know what the scientific method is. They're calling bogus on this so-called research, which has devolved into nothing more than computer modeling. Research is the process of proposing the null hypothesis, gathering data, subjecting it to a statistical test, and either rejecting or failing to reject the null. Now, the anthropogenic global warming movement, as led by Mr. Hansen and Mr. Gore, has failed to do that. And they are consistently failing to do it. And if you read the IPCC report, they admit in the science section of the report that long-term prediction of the climate is not possible. All right, so get off our backs. So this letter is important on the front end as a way of saying this is a continuing problem. Now, I want to weave it back into the interference of the left in modern American life and science. 60 Minutes, which by and large is not one of my favorite shows, did a great story 2 weeks ago And they went down to Florida and they interviewed the people who used to work on the shuttle who have all lost their jobs. They showed President Obama meeting with them as candidate Obama, promising them they wouldn't lose their jobs. And then they showed them in this ghost town that is where the shuttle used to launch from. The most heartbreaking moment of the story, and I urge you to go to 60 Minutes Online and watch this story, the most heartbreaking moment is this big, tough, burly longshoresman who's a crane operator who used to operate the crane that put the launch vehicle in place. He could not even speak. They asked him what did it feel like to have that job and to lose that job, and he got about a half a word out and burst into tears. This big, tough, burly guy who you probably could have put on a barbecue spit and roasted him alive and got nothing but his taunts and insults, broke down crying because he felt that the President of the United States had come to him, promised him that he was going to make sure that NASA went forward and they didn't lose not just this guy's job, not just his career, but our commitment to space. Now, why don't we have $130 billion for NASA? Because we dumped it into green energy. The stimulus, the $1 trillion stimulus, had enough money to fund NASA for 10 years. But instead, we took men like this crane operator and we threw him to the wolves. There is no such thing as human-caused global warming. It's a scam. And there is no such thing as an honest or trustworthy Barack Hussein Obama. I want you to migrate over to our new YouTube site, Terry J. Level 53. We're migrating over there. We've got a number of changes we're making. And also you can go to our website, patriotnetworktv.com. God bless you, God bless the United States, and God bless those good people at NASA.